So far, Unit 4 has been really just about building background knowledge here about macroeconomics and how we evaluate the economy as a whole. So in the fifth and sixth video here of the unit, we are going to take that knowledge that we have now and apply it to look at how the government steps in to try to correct the economy. So the first of the two is fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is a tool used by the federal government to try to impact the nation's economy through adjustments to the tax and spending policy. All right, so this got started with a guy named John Maynard Keynes. So he popularized this idea really took off in the 1930s, used heavily during the Great Depression, and then we've seen it used several times in the United States and other parts of the world with positive and negative consequences of that. But really just the idea that government can impact the macroeconomy, which prior to that, the more classical economic approach was that just to let the market do its thing and correct. And really government was at best going to have a negative, or at best have no impact, but at worst a negative impact on their decisions. So who manages fiscal policy in the United States? We're really looking at Congress. They're the ones making the laws. And obviously the president is going to have a part in that lawmaking process too with the veto power, but also just the president's influence and input as a leader of the nation is going to have a big part in how fiscal policy is managed. Now, ideally, we're going to use fiscal policy in times of an economic downturn by increasing government spending on different programs and or decreasing taxes just to get more money out there into the economy. But some methods we found are more effective than others. This is something known as the multiplier effect. So putting money out there tends to have a multiplied effect over time. And the higher the multiplier, the better the program. Typically what we see is that programs, spending that gets money into the hands of the poor and middle class typically gets the highest multiplier just due to the fact that they tend to spend all the money that they get. Whereas if you get more into the hands of the wealthy, it tends to be saved more and not so much impacting the economy in a positive way. Although some would argue differently. You're looking at these are the people starting businesses and things like that. So you can argue both sides of that. Now, again, ideally, rarely do we actually see this, but upon a recovery, spending should return to a normal level and even to the point of budget surplus. So where you have more money coming in than going out in times of an economic boom. We don't see that very often just because that's fairly unpopular policy to come into an election and say that I plan on raising your taxes and cutting programs because the economy is doing so well. So it's kind of a tough sell from that standpoint. So in theory, the policy works great. In reality, there's political arguments that come out with all of this, and it does not typically work as stated in the theory. All right, so there are really two sides to this. We have expansionary fiscal policy, and then we have contractionary. So expansionary, we'll start there. So whenever we have negative outcomes to our key economic indicators, so that's our unemployment, GDP, and inflation, we can use this to attempt to correct the economy. So if we're facing decreasing GDP, so recession conditions, we're seeing unemployment increasing. We're seeing deflation, which doesn't on the surface seem like such a bad thing, but in reality, the negative outcomes of the decreasing GDP, unemployment doesn't matter if prices are lower if nobody has a job. So we don't tend to want to see reduced prices over time. We tend to want to see that gradual increase in prices due to the growth in the economy. But whenever we're facing those issues, we can use expansionary fiscal policy, which is going to mean increasing our government spending on those programs and services, and also decreasing taxes. It could be a combination of the two, or it could be one or the other. It doesn't really matter. It all just depends on the multiplier and how effective the policy is going to be. But anything that's going to get people back to work, get money pumped out into the economy, that's the goal of expansionary policy. Is to try to make that happen. But in theory, you enact these policies, you're going to deficit spend here at this time to be able to impact the economy in a positive way, create that government spending that's going to increase the economy. And in the end, we're going to see an improved economy as a result. Again, this is very much just in theory, an ideal situation. It's never this simple when it's done in reality. So let's take a look at contractionary. This is even more of a theoretical idea just because we don't tend to see contractionary fiscal policy very often due to the political nature of, it's Congress, it's the president, and the unpopularity of complete lack of popularity in cutting programs, increasing taxes, all of that stuff. So whenever we're faced with an overheated economy, we can use contractionary policy, fiscal policy, to attempt to minimize any potential downfall with like the business cycle. So when we see that we're nearing a peak, we can try to enact some contractionary policy to try to minimize the damage. And again, so that would mean we're facing unsustainable GDP growth. We have low unemployment, and businesses are having a hard time hiring workers because there's not enough available out there. And we see rapid inflation, so prices rising over time, either from that demand pull or cost push side of things. So whenever we're facing those, we can use contractionary fiscal policy, which is just going to be the opposite of expansionary. This is going to be decreasing government spending, cutting programs, reducing money spent on government initiatives, and then also increasing taxes. And the idea would be, again, that we are improving the economy, getting it to a more manageable state if we are enacting contractionary policy. Just as a final note, though, like I said, this is not something that we see in practice very often, especially in the United States, just due to the difficulty in trying to enact any kind of contractionary policy in Congress, just complete lack of popularity with that. But in theory, this is how the government could step in to impact the economy in a positive way and correct these negative fluctuations in the market. All right, that's going to wrap us up on fiscal policy. The next video is going to be about monetary policy, another side of this equation.